on this computer. Okay. I'd like to introduce to everyone, well, before I do, let me just talk a little bit about some communication things. Right now, I have everyone except Father and myself on mute because it just helps with not hearing so much static. You should be able to unmute yourself if there's need to ask a question, but during Father's presentation, what I ask is, if you hover at the bottom, you see chat. And if you would like to send me a question or message or make it a public message or question, you can do that in chat. Even while we're talking, you could type that so that when we have times of breaks, I can refer those questions to Father. Otherwise, we'll keep ourselves muted. I have pinned Father as the speaker. Occasionally, I'll pin myself if I figure out how to do that. And we'll begin. So right now, we have 38 participants and from a variety of parishes throughout the Archdiocese. As you know, our topic is autism, neurodiversity, and faith. And we're very fortunate to have Father Matthew Schneider with us. He is a priest with the Legionnaires of Christ and Regnum Christi. In 2016, after failing as a school chaplain, he was diagnosed with autism, and he made this public in 2019. He is currently studying a doctoral degree in moral theology and lives in Delco. And I think he's already a part of the greater Philadelphia area if he calls Delaware County Delco. So we're so happy to have you. Thanks for spending this time with us, Father. And as I said, we'll go with Father's presentation. There'll be time for questions. I ask that people who may have questions, if you type them out in the chat section, and you find that by hovering over the bottom of your screen, hit chat, and then you can just type those in. All right, Father, you're on. Thanks so much for being here with us.
Thank you very much, Sister Kathleen. So how I understood we want to do this with Sister Kathleen is I'm going to give a brief presentation, then we're going to have a lot of time for questions, more than me giving a presentation for most of the time and such. As such, I think the presentation has two parts. The shorter part is just going to be kind of a little more introduction than the two-line bio I had sent to Sister Kathleen earlier today. And then the latter part is going to be what I would say is 3 stages of helping those on the spectrum really live their Catholic faith, really participate in parish life and all the different aspects of being Catholic. And so just getting into my own life, I always kind of felt that I was different. I was always kind of the nerd in school, or I was always kind of the oddball out. I was never the popular kid. I was never the social butterfly or anything like that at all. And I'd heard a few times autism, Asperger's, especially Asperger's that used to be known. And I thought, oh, that kind of sounds like me. But I thought, it's just a minor thing. And I didn't really concern myself much with it. But then right after I was ordained, I was assigned to be a school chaplain at one of the legionary schools in Canada. Well, actually the only legionary school in Canada. And after a year, I was given a 3-year assignment. And after a year, they're like, you know what, we don't want you back. And I was like, what? I mean, I'd made mistakes, but I thought they were all kind of within the learning curve, like you assign somebody the first year, they're supposed to be a chaplain to a school. I didn't think that expecting them to be 100% perfect was realistic. More often, we all make learning mistakes, and I thought my mistakes were in that, but they said no, and they suggested autism or Asperger's. I thought, and I went for one test right away, and he didn't really test me on anything about autism at that time. Right after that, if anybody knows the MMPI, which is standard psychological test, he basically just gave me the MMPI and said, and didn't give me any kind of diagnosis. But if you look at the MMPI and the autism studies, it's not really a tool used for diagnosing autism. MMPI stands for like Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory or something like that. It's a basic psychological test that like anybody who's in psychology has seen. If you've ever had a test like that's like 300 questions or something, really, really long, that's it. Um, and so, but then about a year later, people in my community said, you know what, you probably should check that out and try and see with another psychologist. Went to that psychologist, did like 10 hours of testing specifically on autism. A lot more specific tests like, oh, here's a picture, tell a story about it, and how you tell the story is going to be is going to have characteristics like that. And then I think she called up and talked to my mom for like an hour or two, and asked her about what I was like as a kid, uh, which was always, kind of in that direction. Although I was always able to 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 behave in a way that didn't cause too big of an issue. Um, and so I was diagnosed then in early 2016. And I think a lot of it is now we're starting to become more aware. Uh, and I think that that's part of it because, like, even in the 1980s when I was growing up, early 90s, I don't think I fit the definitions that were used then, because I had a few moments in school where, had the current definitions existed, I probably would have been diagnosed back in, third grade or fifth grade or something. But the definitions back then were so different. Like now, the CDC only a month ago released the first estimate of adult autism, and it ends up being the same as it is for childhood autism, basically, which means that there are, probably a few million undiagnosed autistic adults in the U.S., considering that the estimate is about 2% and of adults. And from experience, I don't think anywhere near 2% of adults have received a diagnosis of autism. And I think that those type of things are really what is our first stage. The first stage that the church has gone through is kind of an understanding and awareness, because you go back and you read some of the stuff from the 90s, you read some of the stuff that the church did back in the day, and it's kind of awkward. But we've gotten to the point where I think most parishes realize, okay, autistics exist, have made some attempt to accommodate in something or other. And I think that's the first stage. I think we've at least, and we don't just automatically blame, oh my goodness, this person's acting in a way that would be representative of autism, and just freak out or anything. No, we kind of we take it much more in stride. And I think a lot of places have also started moving to what I would call the second stage of the three stages. And the second stage is what I would say more, not just awareness, but acceptance. And acceptance includes things like, for instance, I don't know, probably a bunch of you have seen these. Sorry, I'm just pulling it up. So Loyola Press makes this, my screen at least is showing up backwards, Adaptive First Communion Preparation Kit, and things like that. And those type of things are actually, that level of acceptance where we're accepting that they're different and trying to work with them with that difference. And another way that that's happening is a lot of places starting sensory-friendly masses, or starting the reverse cry room type thing in a parish, which is very helpful for a lot of the sensory issues that that autistics tend to have with regards to our, where we tend to be hyper or hyposensitive. We have an irregular sensitivity to certain sense inputs, whether in one direction or other, and sometimes to a certain extent in both. But that sensitivity is most problematic in mass when it's like it's too loud or too bright for us. So what a number of parishes around the country have done is basically, for one mass on the Sunday, well, one of the cry rooms is for people on the spectrum, and you turn the lights down, you turn the sound system down, and you make it much more accommodating for them, which is something that a lot of parishes have done. It's a relatively simple thing to do. It's not like that, at least that one at least doesn't require a huge investment. It might require a dimmer switch for your cry room that's separate from the rest of the church or something, but that's not a huge investment of time or capital things. And different aspects like that, I think, are really the second stage, which I think the church is moving in towards in many ways. I think that we have been doing that. We have been moving along those stages. And I think really what we need to look forward to is what I would call the third stage, which is which is more of an integration, which is not just saying, okay, we've made it so they can come to Mass. We have a First Communion kit that so they can receive First Communion. But how do they live out their Christian faith in depth? How do they become the apostles? How do they really go deep in prayer? And questions like that. And I think that is a stage which we still, for the most part, haven't really gone to yet in the church. And I think is kind of the next stage, which I think can be a great thing. And I think Bob Quinlan, who's I forget his official title, he works for the National Catholic Partnership of Disabilities. He pointed out that if we want, for any person with disabilities, he said, because he wasn't just talking about autism, if we want to really help them the best we can, we have to want them to be good. They are not just receptors of our ministry, they can become ministers. And I think that's a huge thing. I think also prayer, and not just kind of that they show up to Mass, but own personal prayer and things like that are key as well to go deeper, which I think in different aspects, autistics are going to be different on a little bit in different aspects. That in fact is I meant to mention this for when I was in the intro. I forgot to send to Sister Kathleen, but about a week or two ago, I signed a contract with Pauline Press to write a book on prayer for autistics, which is kind of two parts. Basically, the first part is kind of a systematic presentation of it, and the second part is short daily devotionals, about 500 words a piece, and there should be 52 of those. I had originally proposed 30, but Pauline likes 52 over 30, so now I have to think of 22 other topics because that's. You propose a book to a publisher and they're like, you know what, adjust a little bit. I wasn't thinking, I didn't think I had to I was definitely going to go for it anyways. But anyways, so I think that's still a stage we need to work on. I think for the most part, we have gotten that first stage. The second stage is kind of varies from place to place, where they have the adaptive sacraments. And somebody in the chat there mentioned they have first reconciliation. They also have confirmation there. And I have here as well, beside it with it, there's like a special textbook or teacher book for them as well from Loyola, and different things like that. I think that are all valuable. But then I think what we really need to look at in the next going forward is also that third stage, also helping them to become the ministers, to become the people who are deep in prayer and really living out their faith in a full way, and not just doing the minimal, getting to Mass, getting First Communion done. So hopefully that's helpful. I think those are that's kind of an introduction. I'm sure there are questions. So if I don't know if Sister Catherine wants to read them, or do you want me to just read them, whichever way.
Okay. You know what? I think I will. Let me also see if I can, just for a second. I'm not great at this.
Okay, so I'm seeing Noreen is asking everyone who makes the kit where it's available. It's made by Loyola Press out of Chicago. It's from their website. So if you just go to Loyola Press, I'm sure somebody can, if somebody wants to, just search for that name and it will come up on Google.
And Father, if I could say, I have a list of the Loyola materials on my website for the office. And along with those, they also have a full program called Adaptive Finding God. And I've referenced to that. And if anyone wants to just email me, I can give them that material, more specifically. That's a full program for religious ed for children in the elementary school age, but also can be used for older kids with autism and intellectual disabilities. Someone else asked here, Father, do you know of places where they have low sensory masses and accommodations? And I can assist you in answering.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So I don't know here. You might know you might know right here because I just moved to the archdiocese recently. Being a religious, I moved from here to there. Sister didn't realize when she called me up she thought I was still down in Maryland. So I don't have the exact ones right around here. I do know that there are parishes around the country, like in Dayton, Ohio. They started up in upstate New York. I'm forgetting the town now. It's one of the big ones, but it's not New York and it's not Buffalo. It's one of the other ones.
Mhm.
Syracuse, that's it, Syracuse area, and then north side of Atlanta in one of the suburbs there, in Calgary, Canada. And those are the first four that come to mind. And I know that there's been several others around the country. I've talked to the people in charge of all four of those personally, uh, that have done things like that. And so I know at least those four. I think here there might be something over across the river too, in New Jersey, but I'm not sure. I know one time they had a conference for parents, one over at the Latin Mass Church over in across the river in Jersey. Not in Trenton. What's the other one? The
Camden,
Camden.
yeah.
Camden.
So
I'm
Camden, I believe, has some regional low sensory masses that they've worked on. Here in the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, St. John's Chrysostom in Wallingford has an announced Sunday Mass. It's their 11 o'clock Mass that is a low sensory inclusion Mass. And they do some of the things Father talked about, like they have softer lights. They decrease the loudness of the music. They shorten the music. Father makes a commitment to speak. His homily is a little bit shorter. And they have people with disabilities as participants, as like leading the singing and things like that. And it really has increased the number of families who have members with disabilities, and in particular autism, to come to church. Not only that's every other Sunday they have that, but what they find is that the kids are more adapted now to come to a Mass that is not necessarily low sensory. There are some other parishes that occasionally have it, and there's some parishes talking about beginning a low sensory Mass that's a regular announced Sunday Mass. What St. John's did was they opted to have it as one of their regular Sunday Masses, not a separate Mass, and they announced it to the parish. So people who really like a lot of singing and a lot of sensory input, can opt that Sunday to go to a different Mass, and it's been very successful for them. And we have given workshops on that, and we have kind of like the materials of what the steps are that they took to having that Mass.
That sounds great. I didn't know about that here. As I said, I just arrived. So
Yeah. So we're going to continue with questions that are being written, and then I'm going to unmute people if there's questions, if you want to raise your hand for a question. So I have, hi, Dave and Mercedes Rizzo are here, which is very exciting because they're the authors of the Adaptive Eucharist Kit. And Loyola Press has a special needs section on their website. And they are from St. Joan of Arc in Marlton has a monthly Mass for special needs that's low sensory. So Donna Cushing asked, what was the first stage? She came in just as you were talking about the second stage.
okay, well, the first stage is just even the awareness that autism exists, that we are going to have those kind of struggles, and to not have kind of an immediate reaction that, oh, some autistic kid starts stimming, or a family has to leave because the kid is having sensory overload. Whereas I think most of the time now, if there's enough awareness in society in general and in the church specifically, that if something like that comes out, people don't immediately get super worried about it. They realize, okay, that's just someone who's autistic, and they're reacting in a way that's different from me, but it's not like the end of the world.
Mm-hmm. Let me just look over these before I ask my own question. What was the first stage? Hi. What made you decide to become a priest, Father?
So I was studying electrical engineering of all things, which if you think about being autistic, that's probably like a stereotypical autistic career. Um, and I was really involved in the Catholic community. I was kind of the sacristan. I went to local state school, not like a not a Catholic school or anything. And I really felt that at that time, one time, my second year of university, the local director of youth ministry from the diocese came in and was trying to get us all to go to World Youth Day 2002. And as part of her presentation, she put on the screen the some some audio and video and such from World Youth Day 2000. And listening to John Paul II in that presentation where he says, um, be not afraid to be the saints in the new millennium, something just clicked in my head because I knew that like lay people could be saints. That wasn't an issue, but somehow in there I felt at that moment, just listening to that, I really felt like a click in that sense that, oh, God is calling me to be a priest. And so that's what led me to the priesthood. I'd already thought about it a little bit, but that was kind of like the one moment. And and then and then I went and visited a few different places. And when I really visited the Legionaries of Christ, I fell in love with that community, and so that's why I end up, and then I joined that community the following summer. So.
Mhm. Father, what steps do you think pastoral leaders and catechists need to take next to collaborate with people on the spectrum to reach stage 3 of integration and deeper life within the
Yes.
church?
So I think one of the things is to try and look to the autistics and see what they can do in ministry in your parish. Like if there's somebody who's autistic who just is like super good with uh, with numbers and details and things, maybe they can help be the accountant for some of the ministries. It's not that we have to be the ministries that's out there public or the ministries that's like super Catholic. I know, for example, my mom, not being on the spectrum, but she is the accountant for 4 or 5 different ministries, keeping track of all their money, because and they're all ministries run by women. She sometimes complains that some of these women, she's like, how if they didn't have husbands they'd go broke, she thinks. But but that's her comment. But the whole thing is that that you look for something they can do like that. Like you say, okay, well, maybe it's not somebody who wants to talk like that, or maybe it's somebody who's really into the details and the structure, and maybe they're really good to be the sacristan and sets everything up for mass because they're going to do it just very well, or things like that, to not think that, oh, this person has autism, this person's autistic, therefore I'm just going to like serve them, but think, okay, this person is on the spectrum, what's some way they can serve? And a lot of times that will require dialogue with the person, because I think for those type of things, it's going to vary a lot between people, just like it does with other people who are not autistic. Like if you if you want to get somebody to serve in the church, you don't just think, okay, I'm going to get everybody to become an usher. No, you look at the person, you talk to them, you find out what works best for them, and then from that you try and find a way that they can become more involved. Because I think most people, a lot of people will get more involved, will minister more if they feel the opportunity, the connection there, and things like that. So, and that's for the ministry part. For the prayer part, I think, unfortunately, right now, this is part of the reason I went to write the book like that, is there's very little on autistic prayer from an autistic perspective that really gets into a lot of the details about it. Because I think you start reading about it, one of the things that people talk about a lot is theory of mind in prayer. And so theory of mind is like, when I'm watching here, and see, sister just nodded when I said that. So most of you probably would register this subconsciously, but being autistic, I have to register all this all consciously. She nodded, therefore she either agreed with me or understood what I was saying.
Mhm.
And the theory of mind is my ability to understand what she's thinking or what she's feeling based on external reactions and such. And one of the biggest difficulties in autism is that oftentimes that is not subconscious like it is for 95% of the population. And so when we have to do this consciously, it's less efficient. It's just like if you try and think of every muscle you have to move to walk, you're not going to be able to walk that well. You have to basically have that as an automatic practice, a subconscious thing. And so with that, I think, especially in the initial stages of a mental prayer, that creates kind of an obstacle for those in the spectrum to prayer. But I think a lot of times we can have advantages for later on in prayer, in the sense that a lot of times we have a lot of thoughts and we don't and we have trouble communicating them, because every time when I say, for me to communicate something to you, I have to take it from my idea to that's a word, to word in my mouth, to now this whole electronic thing, but that doesn't really affect it much, to your ears, and then to a word in your head, to a thought in your head. Whereas with God, I communicate my thoughts to God's thoughts, and He communicates vice versa. And I skip that whole process. And I think with that, I think sometimes autistics might have a certain advantage in prayer, once they've gotten over that initial hump, of the theory of mind, of the theory of the divine mind, for lack of a better description of it, which is a difficulty in prayer, because obviously God is a person, and so we have to be able to understand what's He thinking, what's He feeling about us as well, not just kind of a principle, or a moral law. It's not, God is not the 10 commandments. God gave us the 10 commandments, just like my mom might have written 10 rules on the fridge. It doesn't, my mom doesn't become the 10 rules on the fridge. She's still my mom.
Mm-hmm.
Although she said, be home by 10 p.m. or you're grounded.
Mm-hmm.
So things like that. I think also one other thing that's kind of, I with a lot of these things, like acceptance, like in the levels 2 and 3, that I think is important, is that most people who are not autistic tend to like state the concept, and then if needed state examples of the concept, like the general concept, and then say the examples, whereas most on the spectrum tend to prefer the other way around. So take the example of a dog, which is, very generic example. If we think of the 4 legs, furry, friendly, wet nose, barks, things like that. Whereas most autistics will think of, okay, think of a poodle they know, and then I'll think of my dog Rover when I was a kid, my dog Ginger when I was a kid, and Rover, her son, and things like that, And from those, both of those reach the idea of dog, but they reach the idea of dog in a different process. And so I think sometimes in just how we present a lot of this stuff, it's a lot of times presenting a lot of particulars, an inductive method might be more helpful. So.
And, there's a question that relates to that, and it's, Father, my son is high functioning, but has a hard time understanding faith because he tends to think in a very literal way. Do you have any suggestions on how to teach abstract concepts?
Yeah, and I think that's probably one of the biggest things, is to go in an inductive manner, if that makes sense. Like if I'm going to say that, I might give a whole bunch of examples, moving in that way, not just assume that if I present it and maybe explain it without an example, that they're going to get it. And obviously it does get more difficult when you start talking, angels, the Trinity. None of us understand the Trinity. I mean, I've studied years of theology. I don't understand the Trinity fully. I mean, St. Augustine wrote all this stuff, and then he said, I still don't understand the Trinity. So I think with those type of things, we have to recognize that, but we also have to. And the other thing I would say, beyond kind of the inductive method, is to look for a rational explanation. For example, I'll give to myself. For myself, one of the most valuable books I ever read was The Handbook to Christian Apologetics by Peter Kraft and Robert Tuccelli. I don't know if anybody else has read this book. It's like a brick, like this big, like 300 pages, and it's basically like chapter 1 on proofs for God's existence. Chapter 3, here's 20 proofs that heaven exists. Here's 20 proofs that hell exists. All the kind of things are the basic Christian truths very rationally, because I think most people don't like accepting the kind of it's true because I say so, or you have to do it because I say so. But I think autistics are more likely to question that, to ask the why, more to a depth than a lot of times people, neurotypicals, non-autistic people will. Whereas non-autistic people might ask why and might go 1 or 2 levels down. Autistics will often want the why, 8 levels down. And even if you don't understand it, it's worth thinking through it, trying to work through it. There's plenty of, right now with the internet, we have plenty of resources. The Kreft and Shelley book is really good, even though it's like 25 years old now because it was written in the mid 90s, and things like that. And those type of things, to explain it and to keep being able to explain the why and why down to, ultimately it's a mystery of the Trinity, but at least it's gone beyond just why because I say so.
Father, someone would like you to repeat the name of the book slower with the author.
Oh, so it's the Handbook to Christian Apologetics by Kreeft, or spelt Kreft, or spelt Kreeft, Kreeft. This you've probably seen a book by him. He's Peter Kreft. He's one of the top 5 or 10 Catholic authors in the country. And Robert Ticelli, which is just spelt as you can imagine an Italian last name would be spelt, Tacelli.
Yeah.
I think so. I'm doing that from memory. If I have a typo in Ticelli, don't get mad at me, because I'm not 100% sure on that one.
And if I could add, in regards to the question about a high functioning but has a hard time understanding faith, I agree with what Father said, and I've had the opportunity to teach many young children and also adults with on the spectrum, and sometimes just seeing how they process and not being afraid of skipping a step sometimes. And I'll give you this example. With young children with autism, I've had the experience where having the understanding that the consecrated host is Jesus was not really a problem. They would admit it was Jesus, but had a really hard time if I used the idea that that was bread, because it wasn't like any bread that they ate. And so sometimes the literalism is the way you describe it. Like when you said a dog, it's going to be the dog that they know.
Yeah.
So, so sometimes sometimes where the young person or the adult gets caught, in our mind, it's not where we're caught, it's where they're caught. And sometimes you just need to skip that step and go to the next step, or like give more examples so that they have more experience, that there are all kinds of bread. So yes, this is bread that is consecrated and becomes the host. I don't know if that helps. Okay, so is one born with autism? If not, how does it come about, is the question.
So for the most part, it seems that most of the cause is genetic, with that being, depending on where you go, between 60 and 85% or so, and the second biggest cause being in utero environmental factors, and things. They've done a lot of this through like twin or sibling studies, where they do look at 1,000 autistic kids and say, well, like what are their siblings like, especially if it's twins, and they found that it's a slightly higher rate if it's fraternal twins, but not that much higher. But if it's identical twins, it's much higher correlation. So there's a lot of different, and so autism is not so much a single genetic factor. Like you think of a lot of other genetic conditions are one specific gene that you have trouble making one protein for. And autism is not a trouble making a particular protein. It's probably in Okay. I should mention here that my doctoral thesis is on privacy, and part of it is on genetic privacy, and I'm just trying to make sure I don't make this way over like most people's heads because I could really get into the genetic factors that go way too far. Um, but the idea is that autism is not so much you can't make one protein, but kind of interactions between different genes, and they have over 100 genes which have some effect. They found, and it just varies a lot. And it seems that, and autism itself is kind of a diagnosis where you have to have a certain set of criteria, but exactly where in those criteria you have varies. You have to have at least one of, you have to have a certain amount of certain things, but you can have two autistics who don't have a lot of overlap. And it's highly likely that they're, with all those genes, with all that overlap, there is a significant variation in it, that it might be, as we get into the genes and all that, it might be reclassified as 2 or 3 or 5 different, slightly different conditions which are related. But that's at least right now we're kind of in the sense of we know that it's mainly genetic, but we're not sure of all the details.
Father, I have a question. When you mentioned, and I know, like sensory integration or sensory overload, and I know that it varies with specific people. Do you yourself have some sensory integration difficulties, and do they show itself in church, and how did you adapt? Because that's a question that families ask me, like, how do I prepare my child for church to be, to be able to be in church with the community when there are sensory integration difficulties? So I'm asking you too.
No, I get what you're saying. I mean, for me, it's I kind of have a certain degree of irregular sensations, but a lot of mine tend to be more on the hyposensitive, like I'm insensitive to things, rather than the hypersensitive.
Okay.
So I wasn't as much overwhelmed as a lot of the other people that were. I mean, but so for myself, for example, but I think sometimes it's irregularity, not necessarily. It can almost be both ways. I know for myself, for what kind of light is a comfortable level of light, I have the brightest office, but I'm the first one to put on my sunglasses when I go outside in the house, because I think I have a much narrower range that's comfortable than other people. If I go outside with sunglasses for much, I'll start to get over, like too much. But for myself, I haven't had those kind of things where I have a meltdown in there. I will have difficulties if like it was a challenge for me to go to Archbishop Nelson's what do you call it, the installation mass of the new Archbishop and things like that. Like that is a challenge where I need to make sure I'm really making myself extra calm, like beyond just a normal kind of thing for, beforehand, and then basically know that I'm going to be, probably not functional for a little bit afterwards, just because I realize, okay, I'm going to need that downtime, to deal with all the kind of noise and lights and everything else that's going to happen in a big mass like that. Because I was definitely, I was definitely overwhelmed. And you can do other things like the other thing is that it's also just if people don't have have trouble where it is, a lot of times with lights and sound, sunglasses and well done earplugs can help a lot. For example, I got these after the installation masks. I was like almost a disaster after that. I'm not gonna go because I realized like I hadn't done it as well. So these are called Vibes. They're earplugs, but they're specific ones that are designed to reduce the volume but not reduce the sound quality, because how most earplugs when you use them, they're kind of a muffled sound, whereas these ones they're designed, they're like $20 on Amazon. They're not cheap, but they're not expensive either.
What are they called again?
They're called Vibes. Where is that? There we go.
Oh, okay.
And and the idea with those is that it keeps the quality of the sound while reducing the volume, which is unlike most other headphones, earplugs, which are kind of, once you put them on, everything seems muffled. It's hard to make out words, which for a lot of people on the spectrum who would have trouble making out the words and sounds can be extra difficult. And I think if people understand, I think we as a church should help to understand that, if somebody has to wear those to go through mass, well, that's fine. Somebody else here, I don't know who it was, looked like they had their sunglasses on in their house when we were going through when you're starting up. And if somebody is like that, they wear their sunglasses to church. I mean, we should accept those type of people, because,
Right.
it's not like they're doing something to be like, to be disruptive. I mean, or do something, I have your stim toy or something. I have this one, which I got from, this is actually something I got free from when I bought something online, and I still use it. It's still one of the ones I use a lot. So, because this one, being a squeezy thing as opposed to other ones, is completely silent and doesn't bother anybody. Whereas I know, I have other ones that if I use, when I'm in the community chapel, certain other people in the house get annoyed by them. So I try and be charitable. I'm like, if people know that. So for those who aren't on the spectrum or don't know that much, a lot of times because our senses aren't filtered the same way in our brain, a lot of the sensory issues are somehow the filters aren't as well developed in some way. And so sometimes we need to help. We look for external things to help us regulate sensation. And so a lot of times this is why you'll see the flapping or I'll just do this where I'm squeezing this back and forth or something, which is a repetitive motion to help regulate the sensations of the body. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, Father, that was helpful. I like especially your explanation of what happened after you were at the installation, because I think children, like in Catholic schools or in religious ed, when there are things that happen that overwhelm them, to know what their little calming, like to give them an opportunity to calm down, because oftentimes the next thing starts, or
Yeah.
there's dismissal or something that has to be very orderly and again might be overstimulating, to recognize and sometimes parents are great at helping to recognize that, and it would be helpful for them to inform catechist or to inform the ushers that this is what my child or an adult with autism is going to do to calm themselves down. So thank you for that. I have some. Let me go to Anne. Anne, if I could mute you, would you like to share your comment? Let me see. It's not letting me. Let me unmute. There. Nope, you're still not unmuted. For some reason, I'm not. Oh, there we go.
Oh, did it work? All right, let me go back. Wait, hold on. Can you hear me?
Yeah, and, right. And you shared about.
Yeah. Yes, it was like what you were saying with the bread, because I also am on the spectrum too. So it's really cool to hear you talk, Father, because it's a lot of things that I get like 100%. Sister, when you were talking about how they don't understand that a host is bread, it's because in our minds it doesn't fit with what we know. That does not look like bread. You could tell me 100 times that that's bread, but it does not look like bread, but you can tell me that it's Jesus, and I don't really have a template for that, so it's okay. That's Jesus. Like, I get it. Okay, I could do that. The Eucharist is Jesus. So when we're explaining things about the faith to my kids, at least that I work with, it's always, it seems to me, what works is trying to make it fit into the box of things they know, like attach it to something that they're familiar with so it fits, so it all kind of comes together. So it's not trying to change something, because that's kind of really difficult, changing what you think, changing what you think about something, but it fits and it adds. That's all I was saying.
Thank you for sharing that. And
I think that's a good way of thinking of it. when I was in the seminary, I got the nickname Schneiderpedia, kind of like Wikipedia, because I tend to know like a lot of details. But I think to a certain extent, something that in a certain way, what might work as an analogy for some people that helpful to understand it is a brain is, at least our brains are kind of like a Wikipedia article, where a Wikipedia website where we might have knowledge about this, but it's also the link of this to this other thing, and this other thing, and this other thing, and all those kind of interlinking of Wikipedia. Because Wikipedia, what makes it so much, one of the things that makes it so much beyond, like, you know, the Britannica or whatever we all grew up with. Most of us who are a little bit older and didn't grow up with Wikipedia, only had it once we were adult. It only came about once we were adults. Is that I can go and look at, you know, like, you know, the Philadelphia Flyers, and then I can click on, like, you know, the color orange because that's their jersey color or something, and find out about the color orange. And then from the color orange, I can click on the fruit orange, and I can find out about the fruit orange. And from the fruit orange, I can find out about, you know, citrus fruits and things like that, and all those kind of links. And so that's also, I think Anne's right in the sense that that's also a lot of times a very helpful way to do it. I notice sometimes, like in my own conversation, and this is something, is sometimes I'll take 2 of those jumps and then I'll be completely lost with everybody else. Or I'll even take 1, but it's not an obvious leap. Other people we lost, where did that come from? Well, it connected back to what we were talking about 2 minutes ago, you know? But I think that sense is very good, in the sense of kind of, you know, an expanding set of Wikipedia things where they're all kind of interlinked.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I'm going to unmute Noreen, and Noreen, if you wanted to share your comment. Let me see if I just am in. Oh, I lost Noreen. What happened? I don't think I unlinked Noreen. MN. Noreen, are you there? Nope, can't.
I can hear you. Now I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you,
now?
Maureen.
Yeah, it just,
You can.
oh, good. We can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. Hi. No, when Father was talking about the dog example, it reminded me, I don't know if you're familiar with Temple Grandin and her book, Thinking in Pictures, where she goes into great detail about, for example, if you say, my dog, and someone on the spectrum might say, they have a German Shepherd, so they just think that's the dog. And you show them a picture of a poodle. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
And it's not a dog.
Mm-hmm.
Did you lose me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Noreen. Keep going if you had anything else.
Okay, because I'm getting a message, my connection's not stable.
Yeah, that happens.
But anyway, no, so I just mentioned it's a really good book. It really, for those of us not on the spectrum, to see how someone can take things quite literally, and just the different way of thinking. So I just was throwing that out there if anyone was interested.
Thank you, Noreen. And her writing is really wonderful. It does, I think anything that you can read, particularly like, so to look forward to Father's book about prayer, like how you think about prayer and then examples of prayer from people who are neurodiverse kind of helps in understanding more and more of how we can interact, how we can integrate, and also teach children who have autism. So thank you for sharing that. Father, there's a question: what resources and websites do you consider reliable information for educating the public about autism? So what are the autism organizations or websites that you feel are very helpful?
Yeah, I mean, the Autism Society, which was mentioned, is pretty good. There's a number of ones that I rely on for different things. I've kind of liked the Thinking Person's Guide to Autism. It's more of kind of a news update type site. It's not kind of I don't think they have a super good systematic presentation, but on individual stories, they seem pretty good. And then then it just varies. Nothing is coming to the top of my head, off the top of my head, because I think, you know, the ASAN, the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, has a few kind of very general things that are very helpful. On their general, like what is autism page is probably one of the best ones. If you go to, it's asan.org or something like that, or just search ASAN autism. One of the things will be what is autism from the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network, ASAN.
ASAN. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's their page. What is autism is very helpful. They themselves are more of a advocacy group for disability rights type things. So a lot of the rest of the page will be, a lot of the rest of the site is stuff that's beyond the basics for for someone to learn, you know, that would be really get into public policy positions and all those types of things, which gets kind of complicated. But those are some of the things off the top of my head. That's a good question that I really, at the moment, I'm just not thinking. I'm sure in like an hour, like several good ideas will come to me, but right now it's not really coming to me.
Okay, all right. I don't see other questions. I'm happy if someone wants to raise their hand, I'm happy to unmute you if you have a question. And I don't know how to do that, raise your hand. Let me just, I'm gonna right now unmute all. If anyone has a question, they're happy to call it out or a comment.
Sister, I wonder if you could put out to all the parish contacts any of these pages or websites or any information your father has mentioned or anyone else has mentioned that we could put in our bulletins. That would be helpful.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep.
Yes. I have a question, Father. Thank you so much for your honesty and humility. It's very touching. But I also wanted to ask you, your community and your parishioners must love you for this honesty and humility. And do you find that when you preach in your homilies that you not only go into depth of the readings, but also how it applies to you? And then I have a second question, like how do your non-autistic families, what kind of reactions do you get from them?
Okay, so the first thing here is that I'm not a pastor right now. Right now I'm studying a doctoral thesis in moral theology, and I've never been a pastor. Oddly, I was a when I was ordained, my first year I was sent out to be the school chaplain. Kind of didn't do too great there. I'd worked in youth ministry as a religious brother beforehand, and then I did a licentiate in theology, which is kind of like between a master's and doctorate, and did some work behind the scenes for the community. And now I'm doing a doctorate, so I've not ever been a pastor. So a lot of those things aren't super out there. So I do help out here with a few different parishes when they ask for help, and because I'm more of the supply priest right now, because I'm it doesn't really come up with the readings. Like I'm not going to go out of my way to mention it, that I'm autistic to like the parish when it's not applicable to the readings. Although if you search my name on the internet, it comes up really easily. So it's not like I'm hiding it or anything. I just don't want to make it the homily about me. I want to try and make the homily an analysis of the gospel and application to their life, which is what all the doctrines of the church say.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Father, hold on a second. I think I just muted you. Let me unmute.
Do the homily about that. We should do the homily about those type of things. So that's what I focus on. I think, so I mean, I haven't really had that much experience with that, just because I haven't been at a parish where as a pastor or an associate pastor where kind of everybody knows those type of things about the pastor. I've been kind of more, help you out in different ways like that. So.
We have a question from Maureen. Let me unmute you, Maureen. Doesn't want to unmute.
Oh.
Okay. Nope, you just unmute. Maureen, can you unmute yourself? Yeah, there we go.
I think it is. Okay. All right. Good. Thanks. Father, thanks so much. I'm curious. It sounds like your work with a lot of us are teachers and catechists, I think, and it sounds like your work with kids was before you had your diagnosis. And so I'm just curious, are there any particular saints or stories or anything? Like, have you talked to teenagers since your diagnosis and in your ministry? Anything you think would really connect in terms of the tradition of the church with young people who are on the spectrum?
So I think that there's two things that could be helpful for that. One is, I should have mentioned this above when we were talking about different ones, is that the Mission of St. Thorlak, or now they just renamed to Autism Consecrated, is run by Amy Darmer O'Connor. I think I think that's the right way to say it. And so their goal is really to be an autistic ministry in the church. They've done things like they've started to go through the catechism and done it, go through the Baltimore Catechism, which is now out of copyright, which is no longer copyrighted because it's old. And that's why they're using that one rather than the current catechism. And try and think through it in an autistic manner, how those kind of questions come up, how to answer those type of things. And then also related to that is she wrote a book, The Biography of St. Thorlak, which is Thorlak. And Thorlak was one of the bishops in Iceland who she suspects was on the spectrum and is one of the people who kind of systematized the Icelandic church. It's a pretty good biography. It's written, I think you could probably go down to like 10 or 12 reading it, maybe even a little lower. It's definitely doesn't require an adult level of reading, but at the same time, it's not like so low written for children that adults can't read it as well. You know what I mean? Like some books I read in the Catholic Church, I'm like, I can't recommend this to anybody under 18, kind of thing, just because so you need to be like have a high school degree almost to understand it. That's one. Also, Aletheia ran a story about 2-3 years ago of 3 saints who might be on the spectrum, three autistic saints. I'd have to go and find it. It's if you Google it and just Google Autistic Saints Aletheia, which is a Catholic website, ALETEIA. They wrote a story which I think is pretty good, which can be helpful on that.
Yeah, and Maureen, Amy Domer has a website on St. Thorlak.
Yeah,
it's kind of nice.
Yeah, and so somebody's saying that I just seen The Chosen. Yeah, I've watched The Chosen. I think the portrayal of Matthew on there is, which I think is what you're referring to, is reasonably good for someone on the spectrum, because the producers said that they had made Matthew to be on the spectrum, Matthew the tax collector, if you watch it. I think that's a reasonable presentation. I didn't want to say anything until I watched the whole thing, and I only finished watching it like on Sunday, just a few days ago. So I hadn't mentioned anything in any kind of public forum before, but yeah.
Interesting. I think, let me see. This is for the group, and this is from Grace. If you have a person with smaller ear canals who might not be able to use regular earplugs, audiologists can fit you for something called musician earplugs, which is similar to the product that Father described. And it attenuates the noise without losing the quality of the sound. Also, another topic, there is The Chosen, which
that was several of people were commenting on that below as well. Okay. So that's I picked that up. Yeah, I think the vibes I had just noticed it after I went to the installation mass that, like, okay, if I'm going to go to some kind of event like that again, I really want something to to control my ears, and I went around to a number of different forums online to look through what other people had suggested, especially the same kind of, because I figured others on the spectrum had the same issues. And these were recommended as kind of, the $20 version that still is pretty good for audio quality. The musician earplugs, if you go to an audiologist, I'm sure are going to be significantly more, and they probably are even better quality even if you have normal ear canals. It's just, I figure I'm going to go with the $20 version as long as it works, and not go with the $200 version if I don't need it, because I have a vow of poverty and things like that. So.
Great. Well, Father, thank you so much. There is still opportunity to ask questions if anyone wants to ask a question. We'll try to close up by 8:15. Any other questions? I believe you can unmute yourself to ask the question or make a comment. If not, chat with me and I'll try to direct that.
Father?
Yes. Good.
This is more.
We can hear you, Margie.
Children, or is it just going to be for adults?
So my target is to make it kind of like we were talking about, like I was mentioning the book of St. Thorlak. So from probably about 12, 14 up, I'm not going to, it'd be very difficult to make it directly accessible for, 8, 9-year-olds, and make it in a way that adults would also find value in it. Just there's too much difference there. But I think once you get to about 12 or 14, I'm sure Pauline will be more precise in that when they decide it. That's kind of my aim, and I'm sure the daughters of Paul are going to say no. I think we're going to say 13 or 12 or 15 or something there. But I think that's what I'm aiming for. So, if that makes sense.
Father, do you have any closing remarks you'd like to share with us?
Well, I just want to thank you all for this time. I hope everybody learned something, and I hope people are interested. If they want to get in touch with me, I'm here, not too far away in the Archdiocese. You can find me. The easiest thing is just use social media, which is just Autistic Priest or FR Matthew LC on almost any kind of social media. The Autistic Priest is definitely more specifically about autism, whereas the FR Matthew LC is more general Catholic commentary that I write. So I'm willing to come out and help out with if parishes want help with one thing or another, or want me to preach at a mass, something those are possibilities we can try and arrange. I don't know exactly when those type of things might be possible with all the coronavirus kind of shutdowns and things too. But, if people want to get in touch with me, I am available. I'll just type that into the box here so that people have an easy way.
Yeah. Well, that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Wait.
That was my other question. If Father was going to come out and speak to people, if we could have him at a meeting.
And this is Sister Kathleen. My hope was that we would have Father for a live meeting in one of our contact meetings. So that will be a real possibility coming up. Okay, let me see if I can get Father back on. Father Matt, are you there today?
I'm still here, yeah.
Okay, great. All right, so the other thing I just want to mention is that with the Office for Catechetical Formation and the Office for Persons with Disabilities, we're always trying to gather resources and assist catechists in regards to teaching kids who have intellectual disability and or autism. And if you don't mind, Father, before we leave, I know I was closing up, but there is a big difference in the autism spectrum between those who have also autism and a significant intellectual disability and communication disorders. And I firmly believe that even and kids with intellectual disability who may be very low verbal still are called to holiness and to be integrated into our church. Do you want to, before we close with a prayer, is there anything like you can say to help teachers, catechists, and parents regarding those that are more significantly impacted by the autism that they have?
Well, one thing I would say with those type of things is always is if there's a difficulty in communication, to presume that the person is of understanding in those things. So a lot of times what we've learned with autistics who've later on through different kind of electronic means or being able or learn to speak as a teenager rather than as a toddler, were really able to start speaking in full sentences, is that they really understood a lot more than people tended to give them credit for beforehand. And so I think it's also important to, if you're dealing with those type of people, to presume that they're understanding, and not to presume, presume that, oh, they're never going to understand. And first of all, and then the second thing would be just to think that all of these people are God's children. All of them were created in the image and likeness of God. All of them are called to be holy. And in so doing, all of them are able to receive the sacraments, receive, the Eucharist, receive confirmation. Depending on the situation, they may not be able to receive the sacrament of reconciliation or confession, but that's, and things like that. They are called to that holiness, and God has a plan for them. God doesn't create anybody by accident. He has a plan for each person. So I think those type of things are very important to do, because obviously, given myself, I don't have an intellectual disability. I'm doing a doctoral thesis. Intellectual disability and doctoral thesis are kind of incompatible, so that's I think those things are important, as I said.
Right. Thank you. And maybe, more either Zooms or meetings coming up, we'll talk more about that. So again, thank you, Father. And if we could close, would you like to close with a prayer and give us your blessing?
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord Jesus, we ask you to help us, and we ask you to strengthen us in this time, both with all the difficulties that we are going through, and with everyone we know going through with coronavirus, lockdown and things, and also all of our children. We ask you to bless us. And I bless you all in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. All right. So long, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. A special thank you to Father Matthew. And we're so glad you're in our archdiocese, at least for this time that you're doing your doctoral study. And I'm sure we'll have more opportunities to interact and engage. All right.
Okay. Thank you. God bless.
Everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Father Matt.
It's great to see the Rizzos. Are you doing okay?
Oh, yeah.
We're doing great.
Hi, sister.
Good to see you from New Jersey. And
Father Matt.
thanks, Donna. Good seeing you.
You too, sister. Thanks for everything. Bye, Cassandra.
Signing off.
Yeah. The
Bye.
So long. And thanks for what you shared. I appreciate it. Thanks for the good work you do.
Are you trying to say something, Anne? Because you look like you're trying to talk, but I'm not hearing anything.
Let me unmute Anne.
No, I was unmuted. I actually can mute my microphone here. I was actually just looking for the button.
Okay.
That closes it.
Yeah, I got the same thing on here, but.
And I have to mute it for work all the time, so I'm always talking to myself by accident. All right. Bye, guys. Thank you.
So long.
Okay,
Thank you.
God bless.
Bye.
Cassandra, thanks for taking the notes and sending out the little reminders and things like that. Appreciate it.
Yes.
And yeah, you did a great job. I don't know why that I couldn't get myself to pin when I was talking. Did I don't know what I was doing wrong.
It looked like it did on my screen. Maybe it's just on your screen.
Oh,
It
maybe on, oh,
didn't
so
happen.
you did see me. Okay, good to know. That's why I was fiddling around sometimes, because then I was thinking maybe other people didn't get pinned. But you did great, Father.
Okay, well, hopefully it's helpful. I mean, I think it's, I think it's always, there's always a lot, there's a lot to do and there's a lot to do, but I think it's also not to kind of, I think part of the other thing with talking about it as kind of stages is not to think like, okay, our parish is having trouble with, you know, with an autistic kid who's like disrupting mass, so we have to move from like there to like stage 3. Like let's deal with that. Let's move in stages. Let's be realistic. We're not going to say like, you know, you're not going to have your kid in like, you know, Pee Wee hockey and say, hey, you want to join the, you know, why don't you join the Flyers next year? It's not going to happen.
But you know what, I do think actually hearing your story, and it is interesting. I think God does lead us through, you know, like even describing your story about the installation is so key, because I mean, that is, I mean, for people to hear it from someone who can articulate that, oftentimes kids can't say, well, this is just what happened, you know.
Well, and I think sometimes it's kind of like we a lot of times what happens, they get the kid in like a meltdown kind of situation, and then they kind of think, okay, the meltdown, but not realize, okay, like we had this intense sensory thing coming up to it, and not to realize, okay, let's like to try and deal with the meltdown and try preventing it, because honestly, like for 99% of the time, I should say, well, the vast majority of the time at least, it can be prevented if you understand what kind of things set a person off, and how to work with that, you know, like I myself I don't think I've ever really had the meltdown where you're kind of like flailing around. I have more of like the shutdown where I'm just like, you start talking to me and it's just like I might as well be a zombie type thing. And I know I've had that. I didn't really realize what it was until I got diagnosed. But it's not like a super common thing, because I've tended to be in situations where it wasn't as big of a deal. Like my community, we tend to focus a lot more on kind of individual and small group kind of formation type things, which at least for sensory issues is not usually nearly as big of a deal, you know? And that's just that, you know, like, oh, I'm in a small group and I'm with like doing a Bible study with 10 people. Well, I mean, that's, at least for me, that, you know, it's in a normal room is probably not going to have a sensory issue, you know, a Bible study with 10 people. And that's just happened to be how it was. That wasn't what attracted me to the community, but that's what ended up being helpful in that way, I think, in some ways, because that is more of a focus for the Legionaries. It's kind of that individual or small group formation. And that's why, like, even like the pastor thing, like even a lot of priests, we have lots of priests who've been priests for 20, 30 years and haven't never worked full time in a parish, you know, because it's like we have 100 priests in North America, 120 priests in Canada and the US, and we have, I think we have 4 parishes in the country or something, you know, like we have one in New York, one in North Carolina, one in Atlanta, one in there's 1 or 2 others where we're an associate pastor for a diocesan priest being the pastor, but you know, it's not like that's just not like our focus. It's just like you become a Salesian, you end up teaching your whole life.
Right,
you know?
right.
You end up working in a school your whole life. Well, you've never been a pastor. Yeah, I joined the Salesian, then I worked in high schools for the last 30 years as a priest. You know, what do you expect a Salesian to be doing? You know, type thing.
I suspect, and I think that was what the good thing was, that Donna has a daughter with a disability, and I think you know, that she was just excited that people would hear your story. You know, like I think
no, I totally get that. I mean, I'm kind of public about it in the sense that and so it's like anybody who searches my name, it comes up, you know, like pretty quickly. So it's not like, it's by no means like secret or hidden by any stretch of the imagination. So, but I just haven't been, you know, like advertising it, like when it's not really applicable to the exact situation. So
sure. And in fact, let me, all right. Well, thank you so much. And thank
God
you,
bless you.
Sandra, and thanks for all who are still here who joined us.
Father Matt.
I'm sorry?
It was so nice to meet you. I live fairly close to you. I'm in Malvern, so it's maybe 20 minutes away.
Yeah, I know. I was up that way yesterday because I went cycling down the what's the Chester Valley Trail there.
Yeah.
So I probably went more or less past you, but not probably
Yeah.
not directly past you.
And I also